Good morning, folks. This is the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. It's Monday, September 28th, and we're continuing in our mission change rulemaking. We're allowing folks to zoom into our meeting. Give another 30 seconds or so, and then we'll start our meeting. All right, we have folks coming in. Get started. Ms. Larson, the roll call.
Yes. Commissioner Gibbs.
Here.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Here.
Commissioner McGowan. Ms. McGowan. Oh, thank you.
Sorry, sometimes my little space bar works and sometimes it doesn't.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Mesner.
Here.
Commissioner Nanjapa.
Here.
Commissioner Putnam.
Here.
Commissioner Robbins.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have 7 out of 7 commissioners present.
All right, great. Okay, have a full day ahead of us. We are going to be moving into the final round of work on the 200 through 600 series of our rules and the mission change rulemaking. But before we get to that, we do have a consent agenda that is before us. Commissioners have reviewed that. Do we have any questions or comments about consent agenda before we move into that? Commissioner Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. I have one kind of disclosure public statement that needs to be made around the Kerr-McGee application. As I think everyone knows, including the public, Kerr-McGee is a completely owned subsidiary of Occidental Petroleum, which is my former employer. One of the consent agenda items on the agenda today is a pulling application from Kerr-McGee. I'm generally familiar with the wells that are to be pulled by the subject application, and members of my team at Occidental worked on this matter while reporting to me in a supervisory or managerial capacity. I have not had any contacts regarding this application since joining the commission. And I do not have any relationships with Occidental that would affect my ability to review this application, as I believe I can judge this application and others like it fairly and impartially. I therefore do not plan to recuse myself for this application on the consent agenda.
Thank you, Commissioner Gonzalez, duly noted. We appreciate that and agree with you. Are there any further questions, comments, concerns on the consent agenda? And if there are none, I would ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'll move approval of the consent agenda, groups A through G as presented.
Is there a second? Thank you. Any questions, comments, concerns? Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes. Ms. Larson, the consent agenda is approved. At this point in time, I believe we are turning the gavel over to Director Murphy to talk to us about the one rule that we did not finish deliberating on. What we did, folks, just to sort of set the stage here, is last week we finalized our stakeholder input, closing statements, et cetera, into the 200 to 600 series. The commissioners then identified sort of big picture items that deserved specific attention and deliberation. We undertook that deliberation, but we deferred deliberating on Rule 218 to allow Ms. Murphy the additional chance to have further discussions with stakeholders. So we will have that deliberation this morning, and then we'll move into final deliberations on all the rules. Director Murphy.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, Commissioners. Good morning, Colorado. Mr. Minor, would you mind sharing your screen and pulling up the revisions that we made over the weekend to Rule 218? And for context, to me, this captures the items we worked through with you, Commissioners, and kind of talked through. with a couple of notes about where we need to put some statement of basis and purpose language. We spent quite a bit of time working on the question of related to. And if you recall the discussion from Friday, in subpart K, there's a language around items that are related to other items in the commission records. And so we thought about defining related within Rule 218 itself, but ultimately the point of related is, physically co-located, connected, but really ultimately what we want to focus on is that they're related in the commission records, so that if you pull up a well file, you can click the related link and be able to identify the items. And items is a little bit generic, but it could be wells, it could be any number of other facilities. So when we went back through and looked through Rule 218, we noted that at each instance where we use the term related, we also use the language in the commission records, except in one place we use the word related and change that word. Joel, if you want to scroll there, so that we, in this section, have a very precise understanding of related means related in the commission records. And so if in 7 here, we had to use the term related and instead shifted that to be associated, so that in Rule 218, when we're talking about related, it's an item that's related in the commission records. We would clarify that in the SBP, as Joel's note suggests. And so that, I think that was kind of the biggest piece I needed time to work through. Other than that, the other changes that we made to Rule 218 were to, Joel, if you want to scroll down maybe, to delete the attestation to the local government in advance, recognizing that local governments have the ability to request that, but it keeps us, the commission, out of managing confidential information we're receiving from one party and how a subsequent recipient of that information is using it. So I think that that's a good change. And the other piece that's really important is that local governments will still get very timely notice upon the completion of the transfer from us directly, us at the commission. One of the other questions that we needed to work through is, I'll wait till we get down there. Again, the attestation from a prior operator, recognizing that when you're in a transaction, you have a seller and a buyer, and you typically don't have other entities engaged. And so we thought it made sense that to strike the requirement that a prior operator must provide an attestation as a transfer is completed. From our perspective at the staff level, at least, Joel, if you'll scroll up to the language in B, we will continue to capture information about what the selling and buying operator, when they think that a prior operator is responsible for compliance. So we're continuing to capture kind of the state of play or the information without requiring the attestation, which I think accomplishes what we need at the staff level in terms of trying to monitor, what operator is the operator of record for a particular item, and also be able to answer questions as they arise with the operation of a particular facility. So Jeff, Joel, do you want to scroll to the next change? One of the questions that has come up from industry in particular is whether the staff is going to approve the Form 9 intent. And I think the language, we went back and looked at it, clearly notes that staff will be approving the Form 9 intent upon receipt and review of the Form 9 subsequent, which is after the transfer. And so we wanted to make abundantly clear that the approval process is occurring after the transfer. Next change, Joel. And so the change in Part G is a conglomeration of some of the dialogue that we heard from Commissioner Gonzalez in particular, and the commissioners, and also a clarification that staff wanted to include. I think Commissioner Gonzalez was envisioning that if a buying operator operates a well or wells for 60 days or more without obtaining the approval of a Form 9 intent and subsequent the director may require all wells to be shut in. The idea of this, I think, allows the time that staff has articulated in the rules for reviewing and submitting information to be complete. And so Commissioner Gonzalez, I'd look to you to see if that actually accomplishes what you had hoped. The second change in the last sentence is staff making sure we better clarify what the expedited appeal procedures are available. We recognize that staff taking the action of shutting in a well is pretty dramatic, and if that is something that the director pursues, we want a quick ability to bring it forward to the commissioners. And so that's the purpose of the last change. And you know, when we think about 218 generally, I think that there are a couple of important points. One, 218 for staff is really about who is the operator of record in our records. So if something is changing hands and changing operator of record, we want to know that, and that's the information we're trying to gather. Complementary to that is that Rule 218 would not, you know, overwrite or conflict with the responsible party statute. I think that that's somewhat intuitive, and that rules can't change statutes, but I think it would be helpful to state that very clearly, that 218 is about who is our operator of record, and making sure that correctly represents an operator's transaction, and then recognizing that the operator or the responsible party statutes governs who's responsible for a particular facility when we get into kind of that legal who's doing what. So with that, those are the changes that I think kind of bring us back and kind of align us with some of the concerns that industry raised. We did work with a couple of operators over the weekend to make these refinements. If the commissioners want to hear from them, I can certainly point you in the right direction. I think that these generally address concerns. So that's the overview of 218. I can go back over pieces or answer questions, whatever your pleasure.
Commissioners, I guess to start, do we have questions for staff? Director Murphy, would it be helpful to zoom in someone from industry to just get their perspective on the changes that you have offered up? I believe AAG Davenport, that is still appropriate if we so desire.
Yes, that's fine.
Commissioners, do you want to hear from someone from industry? We can do that. I obviously believe that Director Murphy has accurately reflected the discussions that took place, and I assume at this point, Director Murphy, that we're kind of in a good spot with industry in terms of accomplishing the goals that we're trying to be accomplished by COGCC, while taking into account industry business practices.
Chair, I would never be so bold as to say that somebody 100% agrees with what I put forward, but I think it's workable. You know, and I'm sure that anybody would like to rewrite what we've done also. So, yeah, I think it's good. I think it's good language.
I'm good with it. I don't need to bring anybody else on board. Commissioners, I'm seeing sort of slow noddings of heads up and down. It's Monday morning. Copies kicking in. So I think we're good there, Director Murphy. We will, at this point, I don't think we need to do anything further. There are going to be some edits to the statement and basis and purpose, and that's going to happen, conforming edits to the SBP between now and the time that we do our quote final vote on all of these rules. So we'll look forward to seeing that. I think that the way that we have the day set up today is we would then open it up for any further questions from commissioners to anything else in the 200 series at this point. And then we'll move into 300, 500, 400, 600 in that order, I think is the appropriate steps. So commissioners, any other questions for staff around 200 series at this point. Thank you, AAG Minor, for the screen stop share. Going once, going twice. Okay. Moving along, I believe that now we all received and the world received from Hearings Officer Larson on Friday evening, I think it was, the staff 925 draft of each of our rule series that brought into the draft the final deliberations from commissioners. I have reviewed the drafts. I'm sure you all have as well. We'll take them up sequentially in the order in which we took them up for hearing. So first, we would take up any additional thoughts, questions, considerations around the 300 series rules. Okay, I see Commissioner Messner and then Commissioner McGowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a clarification. And under, I believe it's 309. D, or sorry, not D, F2, we made a change in there that the director may extend the consultation period by X number of days. Did we want to put in a specific number of days, or are we leaving it X number of days?
Director Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. I was able to work with Commissioner Putnam, and we both agreed that 60 days seemed reasonable, subject to, the decision of this body.
Okay, thank you.
Good catch, Commissioner McGowan.
Sorry, thank you, Mr. Chair. There was just a follow-up question from a stakeholder group wanting to know if the maps we were using for geological hazard plans were complete and we were able to use them. And I'm just wondering if staff could address that a little bit.
Director Murphy.
Thank you, Commissioner. A couple of different pieces on that. We also received some communication from Citizens for a Healthy Community last week with some kind of what I would say revisions to staff's 918 revisions on geohazards, and staff has worked on that language a little bit and would be happy to put it forward to the commissioners if you want to hear from us about it. I think the more embedded question, Commissioner McGowan, is a little bit about what we need to do in the guidance space about what sources of information operators using and why, and then kind of guidance about what a geologic hazard plan would entail based on what a map or a site-specific review provided to us. And so there's kind of two layers to that, to my answer to you. I do think that we do need guidance, and we can incorporate and reflect some of what I've stated as questions in that. And I think also Mr. Minor has taken a look at the email and may have a bit to offer as well. But maybe not.
AAG Minor, did you want to weigh in?
Certainly I can. It would help perhaps, sorry, to have a more specific question to answer. I apologize. I'm not sure what would be helpful for me to cover.
Commissioner McGowan.
Maybe it would just be helpful if Director Murphy or AAG Minor would talk about kind of what our thoughts were about guidance, so that I know our efforts were to be transparent, and then there was concern that in the transparency about the maps that sometimes we use for mapping geologic, if I'm understanding the comment. And it sounds to me like we have a solution, which is great. I'm glad that you all were thinking about that.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
AAG Minor, yes.
I think I can answer that. The concern about the maps, I think, is a little challenging for staff because there's no requirement that either staff or operators use any given set of maps written into the rule text. And obviously the maps that staff use varies depending on the nature of the geologic hazard. So if you look at the definition of geologic hazard, which is actually in the 600 series, because at the beginning of the hearing, that was the first time the term was used in the Commission's rules. It cross-references the statutory definition in section 2465.1, 103, subpart 8. And that's a fairly long list of geologic hazards. It includes avalanches, landslides, rock falls, unstable slopes, seismic effects, radioactivity, ground subsidence, quite a few things. And so the sort of maps that staff use to identify each of those categories of geologic hazard on a case-by-case basis as appropriate will vary. Certainly staff, as you'll learn in the 800 series, is requesting more detailed maps of sort of seismic hazards, right, as part of the certain types of review. And so I'm not sure that staff has sort of a clear answer on, we will use this category of map in each case to evaluate a plan submitted by an operator. But I think certainly guidance can be one useful tool in helping staff and operators understand what types of resources the operator should be looking to compile the geologic hazard map that's required on the Form 2A, as well as what types of resources could be used to create a geologic hazards plan if the plan is required, because that sort of preliminary mapping exercise does identify a category of geologic hazard in an area.
Commissioner McGowan, follow up?
Nope, that's great. So it sounds to me like we'll work through it a little bit more during guidance, and that there's more than one source where operators can get their background information and put together their plan to address various different kinds of geologic hazards.
You're seeing nodding of heads up and down in an affirmative manner from both Director Murphy as well as AAG Minor.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
AAG Minor, please.
if I may, sorry, while I have the mic, I do want to just get a little bit of clarification, if possible, from the Commission on to Director Murphy's earlier point that about what to fill in where the 925 draft currently says X days in Rule 309F. So I believe Director Murphy said that 60 days is appropriate, which would be an extension of 15 days beyond the normal comment period. So is it correct, and indeed the Commission's direction, that we should replace that XX with a 15? I want to make sure that's sort of clear on the record.
Commissioner Messner.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but my thought is that it was an initial 60-day window with one. It was an initial 60-day window with one additional 60-day extension, making a total of 120 days. That's what I thought it was, but I certainly could be wrong.
Director Murphy, AAG Minor.
Chair, I think that was my recollection, but I would certainly defer to Commissioner Putnam on this.
Commissioner Putnam, she put you on the spot. Do you want to weigh in?
Can you repeat the question?
Commissioner Messner, Commissioner Gonzalez.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Would it be helpful if we pulled up that rule language to walk through while we're talking about it?
Let's have AAG Minor do that.
So, Mr. Chair, the default consultation period is 45 days, though it is 60 days in a disproportionately impacted community. So the alteration in 309F2 is an extension of the consultation period at the request by the director at the request of CDPHE So if the intent is for the total consultation period to be 60 days in that case, this would be 15. But if the intent is to sort of add an additional 60 days, it would be 60. And so I think that's the point I was hoping to clarify.
Yeah, thank you for
Commissioner
clarifying
Putnam,
the
and then
question.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Oh, sorry.
Yep, you have the floor, Commissioner Putnam.
Yeah, I think the proposal, and I believe Commissioner McGowan had made it on Friday, was to have an extension of 60 days beyond it. The extra 15 days is obviously helpful, but I don't think really addresses the underlying resource concern that I flagged last week.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, and this is one that I brought up last week and was concerned about, just kind of the indefinite nature of that extension. And the way I read this rule to be is that there is the 45-day time period for consultation with CDPHE, and then it can be essentially doubled, extended for the same amount of time for an additional 45 days, and then extended an additional third time for what was an indefinite amount of time, now 60 days. I'd like Director Murphy to clear me up and make sure that I'm on the right page the way I'm reading that.
Director Murphy.
Commissioner, that is correct. That's consistent with my reading.
Thank you, Director Murphy. Yeah, and that was consistent with my interpretation as I was thinking about it as you were presenting this morning. I think having that 60-day cap is an appropriate time frame, and we'll see if we've got the right staff here as we work through this in the next couple of years, and we'll figure that out. But I'm comfortable with that as written, with the 60 days there in that last sentence.
Are the rest of the commissioners comfortable with this as drafted? Yep, seeing thumbs up. Other questions, thoughts, considerations from commissioners on the 300 series from the 925 draft that we received from staff? All right, moving to the 500 series. And again, we received the staff draft of the 925 that we are contemplating. Thoughts, questions, concerns, additional ideas? All right, seeing none, moving to the 400 series. Questions, thoughts, considerations around the draft of the 925 draft we received that is on the table? Okay. Moving to the 600 series. Thoughts, questions, concerns, considerations? I have one, but I'll wait and see if we have others with questions. Commissioner Putnam.
Thank you, Chair Robbins. I had a question for staff on the reportable incident forms and reporting. I think we'd had some discussion about PFAS foam related releases. I think I had mentioned that we've, I think been getting really good information from your staff as part of their investigations on that, but I was curious whether it might be possible to amend the Form 22 just to have an explicit call out for if there is a fire to report on the type of foam or other extinguishing agents used, which will be helpful for our understanding of potential environmental releases.
Director Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the question, Commissioner. I've checked with I mean, yes, we can make that change to the form. I don't think it requires a regulatory change. If you all want to put it in regulatory language, we can, but I think it's easy enough for us to amend the form to capture that information. The information of whether PFAS-related firefighting foam was used in response to an incident.
Chair Robbins.
Apologies. Commissioner Putnam.
Thank you, Chair Robbins, and thank you, Director Murphy. I agree. I don't think we need rule changes, especially if we could just get a staff level change in the form. I think that covers, the interest and concern we have. And again, I think staff has been doing a really good job of getting on top of this issue. So thank you.
Chair.
Yes, Director Murphy.
Thank you. Thank you for your kind words, Commissioner. Mr. Minor, thanks. Add a note in the SPP to make sure we memorialize the direction. So.
Okay. I think that takes care of the point. Other questions, thoughts, comments? Commissioner Nanjapa.
This is more of a question for the rest of the commissioners. I had thought that at one point we agreed that while we would discuss the details, we would have a placeholder for a riparian setback. And I just wanted to make sure that that was still what we thought we might do, or if that's something that we would just discuss and then have to revisit the 600 later. But since we have a placeholder, in the 300 series for the discussion that's going to happen related to high priority habitat with alternate location analysis, I thought it might be useful to have the placeholder here with that in mind.
Thoughts from commissioners? Commissioner Messner.
I would agree with that. I think we did have a discussion that we did need to make it through the 1200 series in order to be able to determine some of the specificity around how that may affect the 300 series. But I think having a placeholder in there was certainly my intent, yes.
Others? Seeing nods. Director Murphy?
Thank you, Chair. Staff has started working on the concept of a riparian setback. I think we're still trying to think about where it sits best in the rules. And so that's why staff didn't put like the same kind of placeholder that we have, for example, for high priority habitat for an ALA in the 300 series, like that intellectually just fits right there. And given that there are a number of different objectives that could be achieved with a riparian setback, we're still trying to think about where it best lives. And so I guess what I want to affirm to you is that we heard the direction from the commission to put together a riparian setback. We're actively working on it. We need to start kind of getting it out to the world. But if you can work with us, we're still not quite sure where it rests best. So I think if our lawyers tell us we should pick a place and like have a placeholder, I'm happy to do that. I'm not objecting to it. And if you commissioners think it fits best in the 600 series, that's fine with us. We'll work with it. But I'm trying to articulate why staff didn't put a placeholder in, recognizing we do have the directive.
Other thoughts? Commissioner Nanjapa.
Mr. Chair, thank you, Director Murphy. I think, I'm comfortable. I just wanted to make sure, that was something that was still in consideration. So I appreciate the explanation. In my mind, it seems that with the setbacks and siting requirements that it would make sense to have a placeholder here, but I also know that and have grown to fully appreciate and understand what the staff is thinking about when they're going into all this stuff, things that I don't maybe need to understand. So I appreciate that, and I'm comfortable either way and would defer to the other commissioners.
Other commissioners? Commissioner Messner, then Commissioner McGowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would agree, and thank you, Director Murphy. I think, understanding that we'll have this discussion and we'll try to figure out where it best fits, and I'm open to deferring to staff at this point, understanding that we'll have a discussion on this at a future date.
Commissioner McGowan. Thumbs up. Other questions, thoughts, considerations from commissioners around the 600 series? Commissioners, I have one point that I would like to raise. I was contacted by a stakeholder group, and they expressed concern around the concept that is not found within our rules, but they wanted it to be clear that Rule 604, the siting requirement and setback rule, is not retroactive. And so I wanted to make a statement that is my statement, and then see if there's consensus around this point, so that we've got a clear record. The current rule language that is in our rules, and this is Rule 602L, states that existing production facilities are exempt from the provisions of the Commission's rules with respect to minimum distance requirements and setbacks unless they are found to be unsafe. Existing production facilities are everything associated with the well. So that's our current rule that is in place right now. We did not change that, and it would be applicable to 604. A second point I would like to make is that the setback rule and siting requirement rule 604 specifically states it's prospective because it uses the term will. No working pad surface will be located more than 500 or less than 2,000 feet from one or more building units. Will in my mind is future tense, and so that's a second point. A third point, I would suggest we add the following language to clarify in our statement of basis and purpose. The language is as follows, and I can get this language to AAG minor. Quote, the Commission intends for Rule 604 to apply only prospectively and not retroactively. Consistent with Rule 602L, Rule 604 does not apply to existing production facilities, wells, and oil and gas locations. The Commission does not intend for existing equipment at existing oil and gas locations to change location as a result of adopting Rule 604. And then finally, I would point out that our rules apply to pending or subsequently filed permit applications and are not, for the most part, applied retroactively. We've heard from AAG minor on this point several times. Where we intend to have a rule retroactive, we specifically say that, and we don't say that for the setback and siting requirement rule. So if commissioners are comfortable, I would like to have that language added to the statement and basis and purpose, and the record will reflect the other things that I stated just now relative to Rule 604. Does anyone have any questions, comments, concerns with that clarification? Great. AAG minor, if you can ensure that that language is included in the statement of basis and purpose, and I can send this to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I was able to hear it, and I will, of course, listen on the YouTube recording later to make sure I got it right.
Great. Other questions, thoughts, concerns, etc. around? Yes, Commissioner Najapa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make sure that I was understanding something correctly, and I should have raised this when we were talking about the 300 series. But with the comprehensive area plans, if they have currently been approved, and or the prior, what was it, the comprehensive development plan, the previous, okay. So
I think it's real. Go ahead.
With those that have been previously approved, that the provision that related to the alternate location analysis does not apply. Is that correct? But there's still an OGDP that goes in that we would review as a commission. And so any new comprehensive area plan would still be subject, or would be subject to the current rules if they were submitted at the time that these go into effect. Is that correct?
Director Murphy?
Let me restate what I think the answer is, and if I don't answer your question, let's take it again. So the commission has 3 existing comprehensive development plans that have been approved. One of those I think is largely inactive. One I believe has been permitted with location, both surface use permits and wells. One was approved this spring with kind of a preliminary, but not final, like a preliminary kind of siting sign off on it, and with the understanding that the permits for those locations and wells would come through whatever permitting process was in place at the time. So right now, for example, it's objective criteria permitting. Come January 1st, they will be permitted under the rules that will be adopted and hopefully finalized in the coming weeks by this commission. Then turning, as we move forward for comprehensive area plans, and I'm focusing right now on the 2,000-foot piece of 604B, right? So if an operator proposes a comprehensive area plan and seeks early siting approval from the commission as part of that cap, notice would go to folks within 2,000 feet of a proposed location, and the commission would have the opportunity at the cap stage to look at the proximity within 2,000 feet as part of the cap process. And then if the cap was approved, also OGDPs and 2As and 2s would also still have to be permitted for the cap. So that's, I think that answers the layers of kind of the layers of the process question.
Yes, thank you, Director Murphy. Yeah, I just needed to better understand. I was reviewing some of the comments that we received that related to whether there would sort of be an exemption, for some of these distances. But based on what you just described, that was the piece that I just wanted to understand better with respect to especially those that have already been approved versus those that may come later. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Nanjapa. Thank you, Director Murphy. AAG Minor, did you want to add anything to that, or are you comfortable?
Nothing to add, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Further questions, final thoughts, discussion around the 600 series? Commissioner Nanjapa.
Sorry, one more item was related to, I know we had the note to describe the intent of substantially equivalent in the statement of basis and purpose. I was just curious if maybe Director Murphy or AAG Minor could talk through a little bit about what is intended to be, if you have, I don't know if you have draft language that you could share, or maybe I should just stop myself short of getting into that, but we'll have an opportunity to review that as well. Is that correct? The statement of basis and purpose. Okay.
Director Murphy.
That's correct, Commissioner Nanjapa. You will have the chance to look at the statement of basis and purpose. I think I would feel better letting Joel kind of put together a draft and let folks look at it than us try to extemporaneously say anything right now.
Yeah.
And Mr. Chair, if I may.
AAG Minor.
To be clear, the language that will be in the statement of basis and purpose will not just be my thoughts. I will carefully review the deliberations that you all as commissioners had about what you think the term substantially equivalent information means in close consultation with Mr. Davenport, and make sure that the statement of basis and purpose correctly reflects the deliberations that the commission had about the meaning of that term. And then you'll have a chance to review it and ensure that it does indeed correctly reflect those deliberations.
Thank you, AAG Minor. Commissioner Nanjapa.
Yeah, thank you, AAG Minor and Director Murphy. No, I think I kind of caught myself that I don't want to get into a wordsmithing discussion here, but I did just want to make sure that we'd have a chance to review what was put together. So I'm good. Thank you.
Other commissioners with final thoughts around the 600 series? And we're Director Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. As I promised, staff is continuing to kind of do their OCD editing of the rule series and take a look. And through that process over the weekend, we noted that there's a bit of there could be some confusion between the 600 series and 300 series on hydrogen sulfide plans. And so we would like your authorization to clarify a cross-reference in 612D to explain that a hydrogen sulfide drilling plan may be submitted with both a Form 2 and Form 2A as appropriate. And then obviously we would have we would have guidance on the two topics as well. So.
Good with that, commissioners? Any additional final thoughts on 600? Okay, I think that we have so the next three things that we're going to do, let me suggest the next four things that we're going to do and make sure that we're all on the same page. We need to close the record on 2 through 6, but before we do that, we need to have a discussion. Thank you, AAG Davenport, for showing up. You read my mind. Perhaps, did we take up 500 series? I thought no, we did not. That's why AAG Davenport showed up. AAG Davenport.
Mr. Chair, I was showing up to discuss closing the record, but also I don't recall a discussion of the remainder of the 500 series this morning.
My bad. Let's go back and do that. Do we have questions around the 500 series?
Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Sorry, I believe we did review the 500 series. I don't know if the other commissioners' memory or if I'm just Monday morning confused, but I think we did review.
Well, I thought we did too, but let's just make sure. Does anybody have questions about the 500 series? The artfully crafted 500 series. The wonderfully nuanced 500 series. Okay, so now I think we've done 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Is that right? Everybody good? Okay, so we need to do 4 things. Close the record, but that's the third thing, not the first thing. We need to have a discussion around the application of these rules to pending permits, and I'm prepared to initiate that discussion. We need to have a discussion around our children's trust petition, which is a similar rulemaking that we've taken up in this rulemaking. We then would close the record, and then we would have the final preliminary vote on the rules. AAG Davenport, did I get that correct?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, you had the order as I had it in my mind. The only thing that I would add is after the preliminary final vote, we would need to adjourn to a specific future date for the final vote and for consideration of conforming edits and the SBP and any, I believe, proofreading errors that staff may have noticed in the rules in the interim, if that's the commission's pleasure.
Okay. That sounds good. So to kick off the discussion around application of the current, of the proposed 200 through 600 rules to pending permits. Colorado Revised Statute 244104.5 authorizes the commission to apply rules promulgated as part of the 200 to 600 series mission change rulemaking to pending permits, provided the commission makes written findings in 3 different areas, and these are ors, so either 1 or 2 or 3 or all 3. But we would need to make a written findings that the new rules materially affect the health and safety of the public, so that's 1, or 2, that the new rules are necessary to ensure that the COGCC in any permit will be in compliance with federal law or regulations, or 3, that the new rules are necessary to ensure the COGCC in any permit will not be in conflict with state statutes. Okay, so that's the discussion we need to have. I, as one commissioner, find that the new rules meet all 3 of those categories. First, the 200 to 600 series mission change rules materially affect the health and safety of the public. The purpose of the 200 to 600 series mission change rulemaking is to implement Senate Bill 19-181's changes to the Commission's mission and statutory authority. SB 19-181 changed the Commission's mission to regulate the development and production of the natural resources of oil and gas in the state of Colorado in a manner that protects public health, safety, welfare, including protection of the environment and wildlife resources. SB 19-181 also instructed the Commission to regulate oil and gas operations in a reasonable manner to protect and minimize adverse impacts to public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources, and shall protect against adverse environmental impacts on any air, water, soil, or biological resource resulting from oil and gas operations. That is a quotation from CRS 3460-106-2.5A. My finding is that one of the primary purposes of the 200 to 600 series mission change rulemaking is to adopt rules that materially affect and protect public health and safety. And I find that there are numerous specific rules in the 200 to 600 series mission change rulemaking that are explicitly focused on public health and safety. So from my perspective, our rules meet the first prong of whether they should be promulgated and applied to pending permits. That is, that the new rules materially affect the health and safety of the public. The second prong is whether the new rules are necessary to ensure the COGCC and any permit will be in compliance with federal law or regulations. The continued application of the Commission's prior rules that were in effect as of the date were submitted is likely to result in critical safety issues not applied to the oil and gas location if the permit applicant does not comply with the rules adopted and amended in the 200 to 600 series mission change rulemaking. I find that several 600 series rules are explicitly intended to prevent unsafe situations that could otherwise arise and to provide better procedures for responding to emergency situations, natural disasters, and accidents that otherwise could pose safety risk. Third, I believe that compliance with the 200 to 600 series mission change rules is necessary to ensure that the Commission and all permits it issues will be in compliance with requirements of federal law and regulations. I believe there are several rules in the 200 to 600 mission change rulemakings that are intended to ensure compliance with federal laws and regulations. So I believe the second prong is met. And then finally, compliance with the 200 and 600 series mission change rules is necessary to ensure that the Commission and all permits it issues will not be in conflict with state statutes. The 200 to 600 series mission change rulemaking was conducted to specifically implement 3 rulemakings required by SB 181. The mission change, or the 106.2.5A rules, the cumulative impacts, or the 3460-106-11C Roman numeral 2, and the alternative location analysis rules, which is 3460-106-11C Roman numeral 1. Additionally, I believe that numerous rules adopted in the 200 to 600 series mission change rulemaking implement other specific statutory changes by SB 19-181. Therefore, I think that the third prong, that the new rules are necessary to ensure that the COGCC and any permit will not be in conflict with state statutes. I believe we've also met that prong as well, and that these new rules should apply to pending permits. I would like to direct the COGC staff to include these findings in the statement of basis and purpose for the 200 to 600 series mission change rulemaking, and to expand the findings if appropriate. I did not reiterate or go through all of the various rules that, in my opinion, satisfy these three findings. We then would, when we take the final vote at the end of the 8, 9, and 12, review and approve the findings in the revised draft statement, basis, and purpose prior to or as part of that final vote. And the last piece I would like to point out to the commissioners and to our stakeholders is that Colorado Revised Statute Section 24.104.52B requires that the commission, if we establish that these rules are going to apply to pending permits, that we provide a reasonable opportunity for operators to comply with the new rules. So I would suggest that we direct staff to develop a process to provide applicants with a reasonable opportunity and to present that process to the commission after the mission change rulemaking is complete, but before the rules promulgated herein become effective. So that was a lot. Hopefully you were able to follow it. I would now open up this issue of the applicability of the pending rules to, or the rules to pending permits, to the other commissioners for thoughts, comments, and deliberation. Commissioner Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I've got more questions and comments in this regard. I'm going to start off with a comment, though. In the draft statement of basis and purposes that currently stands, we address this issue, and I think it's pretty clear that the intention is that the rules adopted through this rulemaking will apply to all permit applications that were submitted and deemed complete but not yet approved prior to the adoption of the rules. So this doesn't seem like it would be a surprise to anyone who's been paying attention to these proceedings or who has read these documents, with a finding congruent with what Chair Robbins has suggested. It also goes on to state that the staff will issue guidance for procedures that operators with in-process, on hold, or delayed permit applications may follow in order to amend their permits. And so my question is twofold for Director Murphy. Is there a way to summarize and quantify the impact of the applicability to pending permits, A, and then B, is there, I imagine in the discussions up to this point with the permits that have been coming in during this whole rulemaking process, that there's been some guidance or some conversations with staff, potentially some directions on what this might look like. And I'm curious if any of that could be shared with us commissioners and with the public at this time.
Director Murphy.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the questions, Commissioner. I think where I want to start is that we do have a pretty large backlog, for lack of a better word, of permits that have been filed but have not moved through the review process. And I think the number of permits filed has long exceeded staff's capacity to process them. And so we've worked with operators on priority lists to understand what their top permitting priorities actually are, recognizing that we don't have much of a tool to kick out, require removal of pending permits. And for a long time, having a permit in place was of great value to operators. So we have a much larger backlog of permits than those we're actually working on. And in my experience, kind of the flow through rate is of the ones that are most important to an operator's capital expenditures or drilling plans or whatever it is, and has been for over the course of a couple of years. So there's a large volume of permits that are out of date, probably even with current rules in terms of what the requirements are. So since 181 was signed, we have worked through objective criteria permitting, and so permits that were filed went through additional review based to ensure that they could be approved in compliance with 181. Permits that did not meet that standard were issued a delay notice, and that's been used I would say fairly infrequently. And whether that's because operators aren't prioritizing, I mean, there's a number of reasons why it's been an infrequently used tool. And so that process will continue through January 1st, assuming that these rules are effective January 1st. That process will continue through to the effective date of the new rules. I think giving operators a chance to look at what they have on file and evaluate whether it makes business sense for them to bring it into compliance, whether it conforms with their future capital expenditure plans, et cetera, makes a lot of sense to me, and I think provides an opportunity to kind of clear out a number of permits that maybe aren't a priority on some level. So I think it will affect a large number of permits in process, but I don't have any indication that those are huge priorities either in terms of what the plans are, because we have been letting operators direct what their priorities are. And I'm not sure I answered all of the layers of your question, Commissioner, so I'm happy to take another cut at it.
Thank you, Director Chair. It was a multi-layered question, so I appreciate the attempt, and I think you got most of it. So I appreciate that. And what I'm getting at is just in my experience, I know that you, the director, and your staff works with operators. You guys kind of have an evergreen process. I saw it prior to my time on the commission under the director's criteria, and kind of the first pass these drafts. And I'm just trying to make it clear. That this is not something that would be a surprise to operators, the applicability to pending permits. And with the prioritization, it's my understanding that most of the permits that are prioritized and have been submitted in the last, say, year to 18 months are likely to conform with the very least SB 19181 and the director's criteria. Are those all fair statements, Director Murphy?
Chair.
Director Murphy.
Thank you. I think that operators have done a good job of elevating protections and looking at what 181 requires and looking at the landscape and looking at alternative locations. The harder question, and the reason I have a bit of a pause right now, is thinking about, I would say, whether you approach it from kind of the OGDP level, but there are some fundamental shifts in what information is coming in that I think are achievable for operators with what they've been submitting, but are new in terms of kind of the number of plans, looking at it first from the oil and gas development plan, that are going to require a shift in processes and thinking and doing work. But I hope that operators look at the structure of the oil and gas development plan and see the opportunity to put together a package of permits that hang together, that work together, that can be considered together because of how they work in the landscape to gain some efficiencies with the process. And that will require kind of some rethinking in terms of how permits are currently filed. So it's kind of, I have a little bit of a mixed answer, just thinking about kind of the whole process shift that has been largely, I mean, it isn't adopted because you haven't taken the final vote at all, but has been acknowledged kind of in the 300 series as revised. And I think that there's the opportunity to kind of fold into that. Staff has been working incredibly hard to get forms up and ready and running so that when we get to the effective date, we're ready to go, and we're not creating kind of a slowdown. I think that one of the unintended benefits of slowing the process down a little bit is it gave staff a little bit more time to build out those permits and start working on it. I will say that in the last 3 to 5 months, permit submittals have dropped fairly dramatically. I can speculate about why, whether it's the recognition that there is a pretty substantial shift in how permit information is coming in through revised forms and not wanting to invest in what will be an outdated system in 6 months, whether it's the economic downturn. I mean, there's any number of reasons why the flow of permits has dropped, but we're doing our best to make sure that we have a system up and ready and running January 1st to conform with the rules as revised by the Commission.
Commissioner Gonzalez, I would also like to take a crack, having been director for 18 months and reviewed a lot of objective criteria permits. You mentioned, is it fair to say that the permits that have been applied for in the last 18 months are consistent with objective criteria I think the answer is maybe sort of kind of. I think that, operators got better at recognizing objective criteria in their applications. I think that operators also amended applications to be able to show compliance with objective criteria in a positive fashion. I think that you saw kind of a downturn when objective criteria first were applied, and then kind of an upturn as we created good pathways to ensure protections in those permits that got approved. So I think it was kind of a mixed bag. So I wanted to put my perspective on that on the record. I also have, one of the things that I think that's important for COGCC and our regulated community is today's preliminary final vote, I think is called, as AG Davenport wants me to call it, because it does send a signal that this is what the new protocol is going to look like. And that, I think, is very helpful to the regulated community, because I think they can start thinking about picking those permits that they want to amend during this reasonable period of time to get it amended and in compliance with the OGDP process, because they now know under the Rule 300 series, here are the plans they need to, start working on. And similarly, as Director Murphy just mentioned, I'm sure, knowing Ms. Jane Stanzik and Greg Duranolo and our permitting staff, I'm sure that they are going to be rolling up their sleeves and putting in place the appropriate guidelines so that folks can be ready to roll with OGDP applications, so that there's not a delay associated with implementation of new rules. We can all be working on getting those applications that, from a business perspective, need to be looked at, getting them into compliance with the 181 protocol so that they're able to move forward, all in a manner that's protective. So I think this is playing out, somewhat fortuitously in a good place. So I'll stop there, but Director Murphy, did you want to add to that at all? Okay. Commissioner Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Director Murphy, and I really appreciate all the commentary in that regard. Obviously, I think there's a concern with the regulated community being able to have some sort of certainty for timing for executing their business, and that's what I wanted to make sure that we at the very least discussed here publicly for all of our stakeholders. I have a follow-up question for you, Director Murphy, specifically as to if an operator comes in, they say, okay, these are our new rules. We get our final thumbs up, thumbs down today, and they start working under these new rules. And when are they able to start submitting applications, and when will those applications start getting processed under these new rules?
Director Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the question, Commissioner. As I said, we're doing everything we can to have forms ready, maybe in advance of the effective date. And I mean, I need to talk to our lawyers about whether we could, if they are ready earlier, people can start working on them or not. But my hope would be that it's a fairly seamless transition, and starting January 1st, staff will be required by law to apply the new rules, or as of the effective date. And so staff will start reviewing permits under the new criteria or under the new regulatory requirements at that point in time. In a perfect world, if we had forms ready earlier, it would be a good thing, so that we could work through them, see how they're operating, get stuff in the queue. I just, one, don't know if it's possible, and two, don't know if it's legal. So we'll continue to work on that front, though, and I'll consult with our lawyers about how best to do that, assuming we get the forms themselves up and running. Like I said, I know our team's been, deeply engaged and kind of in the background of all of this, starting kind of July-ish. We started kind of putting together lists of what are the guidances that we need out first to get to, again, kind of a smooth transition where people understand what staff's expectations are and can begin moving these forward and really elevating permit decisions to you all, which is what the rules contemplate, as quickly, as expeditiously as is appropriate. And so we have started working on guidance documents, and again, all of the pre-work that has gone into the forms and the guidance documents has been cautious, given that we didn't know where many of these questions would land. And so I think as of really today and even last week, we felt more confident moving forward with kind of those edits and getting things revised and out so that we can provide certainty to all of our stakeholders.
Thank you, Director Murphy.
Thank you, Director Murphy. And perhaps, I mean, it's always like we're just piling on to staff more and more work when we're doing all of this, but perhaps as you guys get out from under the weight of 2 to 6, and I know you're still under the weight of 8 to 9 and 12, but perhaps as your staff starts to sort of see the daylight, you know, we can have a report back to commission in a transparent sort of fashion at one of our weekly meetings so that we can sort of continue this discussion. I think it's an important discussion for all involved. So really thank the staff for your continued work on this front. And I'm sure that I feel confident in the success in the transition that is contemplated by all of this. Other commissioners with questions around this pending permit discussion and deliberation? Commissioner McGowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm just going to apologize up front if this is an ignorant question. This is going to be a dumb question, so I'm sorry. So are we, the drilling and spacing units and the pooling, those are not permits. So will the commission still be seeing those requests? Just for clarity for me.
Director Murphy.
Commissioner McGowan, yes. The commission has always been, and I think will always be, the decider. Sorry, that's kind of a bad book right now. The decision maker on spacing and pooling. And for spacing, we've folded that into a consideration of the oil and gas development plan, just because spacing and surface locations hang together, and some of the language in 181 in my non-legal assessment kind of married those two processes in a way that makes more sense to look at them together. And then pooling continues to be its own process that will continue to come to you through the hearings chain as appropriate. So yes.
Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Please, you still have the floor, Commissioner McGowan.
Are those, I don't think I asked my question correctly. I know that they're still going to come to the commission. Are those also on hold as part now of a permit request, or are those considered separate and will still come to the commission while we are figuring out and finalizing the rules and the guidance for folks to be able to fill out their permits? I'm sorry.
Director Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner, for the clarification. So this interim period, what will happen for spacing and pooling is what I understand it to be. And I mean, pooling has never, we've never folded, staff has never proposed, and the commission thus far in its considerations has never folded pooling into the oil and gas development plan decision making. And I think that's appropriate, but I'm not going to go down into that rabbit hole right now unless you really want me to, you know, comment extemporaneously on it, which I'm happy to do. And so pooling will kind of, I don't see many fundamental changes to the pooling process based on the work that has been done on the 500 series to date. So that will kind of continue. And all that to say that after January 1st, there probably aren't substantial changes to pooling. And I'd also invite Mimi to chime in as soon as I finish kind of my next statement, which is I think spacing will continue in the interim. I don't have a great sense of how many spacing applications are pending right now and how they hang together with the pending permits, because right now there's such disparate processes for us. But Ms. Larson, I don't, if you want to chime in on kind of the workflow on that front that you foresee between now and January.
Certainly. Thank you, Director Murphy. Yes, you're correct in that our hearing staff will continue to process our pending drilling and spacing unit applications that we have before us. As with the new OGDP plan and the guidance that staff will be working on and putting out to assist operators in transitioning future OGDP permits and whatever pending permits they may have in our offices to the new OGDP rules, we will be doing the same for the DSUs, in that we will ensure that the processes for consideration of a DSU application are streamlined and now readily part of the OGDP process when those new rules go into effect. So as of, assuming it's January 1, the effective date of these new rules, we would then have the process in place to permit operators to incorporate their pending DSU applications, if that is the commission's desire, into the OGDP plans that would also need to be resubmitted to this, to the commission.
Any further follow-up, Commissioner McGowan? Seeing none. Other commissioners with questions? Thoughts? Commissioner Messner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to express my agreement with both Commissioner Gonzalez as well as Commissioner Robbins or Chair Robbins as far as what their findings are. I do think it meets the standards as Chairman Robbins has indicated on all three levels. I agree with Commissioner Gonzalez that for those that have been paying attention, it's clear that the intent was to apply these to permits that are in the pipeline. Having said that, I've heard from a number of operators that the submittals and the plans that are part of the rules that we are drafting are part of standard operating procedures and things that they are already doing, whether that's alternative location analysis, or best management practices, or many of the other things. And I had one operator, I think, state it pretty clearly that this is just a matter of showing their work in the different plans. And I think that's a good way to look at it. And so I do think that, you know, the majority of operators, you know, are paying attention, do understand that, and are going to engage in the process of showing their work that they're already doing in order to be able to meet the requirements that we're moving forward with here. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Messner. Further thoughts, consideration around this topic? Okay. I think that Director Murphy, we have provided staff with the appropriate additional direction on the pending permit question. I note that it already was contained within the statement of basis and purpose. Now that we have finalized or are close to finalizing the preliminary final vote on 2 through 6, we might be able to edit, since we now know what it looks like as compared to when it started. And we'll look at that when we take up the final vote here in a month or so. We have, I think next is to discuss and deliberate the Our Children's Trust petition. Would look to fellow commissioners, it's 10:20, which is pretty close to our morning break time. Do we want to take a 15-minute break and then come back to that and then move to closing the record? I'm seeing some nods. Let's return at 10:35. Welcome back, everyone. This is the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission mission change rulemaking and final preliminary deliberations on the 200 through 600 series. We have now this morning gone through the 200 through 600 series with some final additional clarifying suggestions. We've had our discussion around pending permits. We have 4 things left before us. We need to discuss and deliberate on the Our Children's Trust petition. We need to then close the record, take a preliminary final vote, and then determine next steps. So before us now is the discussion of Our Children's Trust petition. I've got a few words to sort of set the framework on this in terms of why it is that we are discussing Our Children's Trust petition, as well as my preliminary ideas around the petition itself. And some of this was from guidance we received from AAG Davenport, so would like to make sure he's available in case I misconstrue the relevant statutory provisions. But Colorado Revised Statute Section 244103 is the rulemaking provision of the Administrative Procedures Act, and it provides that while action on any petition is within the discretion of the agency, quote, when an agency undertakes rulemaking on any matter, all related petitions for the issuance, amendment, or repeal of rules on such matter shall be considered and acted upon in the same proceeding. We early on concluded that Our Children's Trust petition is related to the subject matter of the mission change rulemaking, and it is necessary and appropriate for the commission to consider and act upon the rules proposed in the petition as part of this 200 to 600 series mission change rulemaking. And I would note for the record that we allowed all parties to brief the petition and its merits, as well as to allow the petitioner's attorneys to respond in writing, and then we had oral argument statements on the record. I, for one, believe that the petition expresses sincere and valid concern regarding the impacts of oil and gas development and proposed rules to evaluate and address cumulative impacts resulting from oil and gas operations during the permitting process. I also believe that the draft rules proposed by staff and as revised by us following commission deliberation address the same concerns addressed by the petitioners. The draft rules also specifically address some concepts central to the regulations proposed in the petition, including the creation of a baseline inventory. As the draft rules address the concerns expressed by the petition, I, as one commissioner, do not believe it is necessary or appropriate to adopt the petition's proposed cumulative impact rules. Second, I, as one commissioner, do not find it necessary or appropriate for the commission to adopt the petition's proposed rule that no new permits will be issued until the mission change rules are effective. I base this upon my understanding of Senate Bill 181, which specifically provided the director of the commission authority to continue permitting and to delay a decision on permit applications which require additional analysis to ensure protection of public health, safety, welfare, or the environment. In other words, the objective criteria permitting direction that the director received and that we have been operating under established that it was the legislative intent that permits would continue to issue, and there would not be a ban on permits, but that they would only issue if they met the objective criteria and were found to be protective. Finally, I, as one commissioner, do not believe that we should adopt the petition's proposed rule regarding the creation of a Climate Adaptation and Mitigation Program Fund. The Act, as amended by 181, provides the Commission with authority to adopt permitting fees to cover the reasonably foreseeable direct and indirect cost of regulating oil and gas operations, but does not, in my opinion, provide the Commission with authority to create the fund proposed by the petition, which goes beyond the Commission's regulatory scope, for example, by funding residential electrical heating systems. Those are my thoughts around the petition. At this point, we need to hear from others about the petition and then make a determination on the petition itself before we move into next steps. AAG Davenport, did you have anything to add relevant to the Commission's consideration of the Commission that we have undertaken to date, or as to steps that are necessary for us in deliberation now?
Mr. Chair, thank you. The only thing that I would add is I think it's appropriate and necessary for the Commission to direct staff to include in the statement of basis and purpose their rationale regarding the OTC petition. And to provide staff with the opportunity to expand on that rationale as staff thinks is appropriate. Of course, the commission will have an opportunity to review the staff proposed statements in the statement of basis and purpose regarding the petition before final approval.
Very good. I agree with both of those points. Commissioners, others with thoughts about this topic? Commissioner Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will echo some of your comments. I think that's the right place. I really appreciate what the youth petitioners have brought up in this petition. They bring up some great points. They obviously have a lot of passion surrounding this, and I think that where we are going with our staff draft rules and what we put together here as a 5+2 member commission, that we're in the right place, and I support your direction, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Gonzalez. Other commissioners with thoughts? Commissioner McGowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with everything that's been said already. In addition, as I was reading the petition, I felt like a lot of things that we're working on and that we've been talking about start to address what is in the petition within our purview. And I know that we're still going to be talking about the evaluate and address cumulative impacts. And I know that some of that's going to happen in the later series here, and that we're all diligently working on these pieces. And I think the pieces that are within the commission's purview are addressing as best we can what's in the petition. So,
Commissioner Nanjapa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I will also echo what others have said and agree with, with the points that you made, and also what Commissioner McGowan just noted, that I think we have gone a long way to address as where we can, or to begin addressing as best we can. And I think Commissioner Putnam was someone who mentioned this before. We'll continue to reevaluate. We'll see how these things are working, and we'll revisit as needed. And I think that we have all discussed and seem to be in agreement with that. And so I also feel comfortable with where we are and with your statements.
Thank you, Commissioner Nanjapa. Do we have further discussion, thoughts? If not, I believe that the appropriate next step is for this commission to provide its direction to staff to incorporate the reasoning that we've stated this morning into the statement of basis and purpose for the 200 to 600 rules, and authorize staff to add detail or supplement this reasoning as appropriate. And then we would review the final statement, basis and purpose, when we take a final vote on the 2 to 600 series in about a month. AG Davenport, does that need to be in the form of a motion, or is this direction with the nodding of heads and thumbs up sufficient?
That's sufficient direction. Thank you.
Okay. With that, I think we are at the stage to close the record. AG Davenport, I might ask you to provide a reminder around the notion of closing the record and what that means, so that we're all fully aware of the implications of closing the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioners, closing the record is a significant procedural step in this rulemaking. It requires a motion and a vote by you to close the record. What it means is that the commission, if the record is closed, is not accepting any new information into the record after it's closed, meaning you may not have substantive conversations with the parties or staff while the record is closed. You may reopen the record or reopen it for a limited purpose later by motion and vote. For example, and I do recommend that you do this, reopen the record for purposes of discussing conforming edits and the statement of basis and purpose when the commission meets again in the future. But by closing the record, it means no information may be taken in that interim period between the time that the record is closed and should you choose to reopen that record later, which means that no further communications between the parties should be had, between you and the parties should be had, and no further substantive communications between you and staff should be had on this rulemaking, the 2 through 600 series rulemaking.
AG Davenport, not to put a fine pen on it, but I'm going to. What does that mean with regard to stakeholders, parties, others that email us about the topics in the 2 to 600?
First of all, they should not do that. They should not attempt to communicate with you in any way on the 2 through 600 mission change rulemaking rules after the record is closed. And should they attempt to do that, commissioners, I would recommend that you not review that communication, that we let all the parties know right now that that communication will not go into the record for the rulemaking. And we will treat it as if it did not happen.
Okay. Thank you. That is helpful information.
And just to be clear, commissioners, it also means that you should not reach out to parties in regards to the 2 through 600. Yeah.
All right. With that, if there's no further discussion, I would entertain a motion to close the record in the 200 to 600 rulemaking, which is docket number 200300071. Commissioner Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not trying to delay this any further, but I might have a follow-up question for AG Davenport about communications regarding 2 to 600. And as we are considering the 8, 9, and 1200 series and the interplay with 600 that we've discussed, last week and earlier this morning, specifically with regard to repairing setbacks, and I'm curious as to that type of interaction or communication with those same parties who are also involved with that, with our next rulemaking, and kind of how that overlap works, how we can kind of walk that line.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Gonzalez. I think within the scope of the 8, 9, and 12 series rulemaking, conforming edits to the 2 through 6 were within that scope, and it's appropriate to hear from the parties in the course of that rulemaking about those conforming edits. But in my view, those would need to be quite closely tied to conforming edits and not taken as an opportunity to sneak into the non-conforming edits in 2 through 600.
Any follow-up, Commissioner Gonzalez, or from any of the other commissioners? Any other questions before we undertake a motion? All right, then again, I would entertain a motion to close the record in docket number 200300071.
So moved.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those. Oh. Was that someone? No. Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? The record in docket number 200300071 is closed. AAG Davenport, would turn to you for next steps. This is the discussion around the preliminary final vote on 200 to 600.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioners, closing the record does not preclude you from deliberating further on these rules. However, if you are prepared to take a vote on the rules, the concept that I envision, because we are not prepared to issue final agency action yet for 3 reasons, in my view. The first reason is we expect to make conforming changes after the 8, 9, and 12. The second reason is the commission does not have a final statement of basis and purpose yet, and so is not ready to approve that. And we would need to approve a final statement of basis and purpose along with the final rules. And finally, I do recommend that the commission give staff an opportunity to run through these rules one more time in an effort to correct any typographical or proofreading errors that they notice as they're running through one more time. I think a final check to make sure that all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed is probably a good idea. So the concept that we're discussing is a preliminary final approval, which means effectively that the commission is indicating substantive approval of the rules. In other words, it does not intend to revisit the substantive language of the rules. And I also recommend that the commission specifically call out in its preliminary final motion that the three potential changes it does expect to make: conforming edits, correcting any proofreading errors, and reviewing and approving the final SBP. So again, we're talking about a motion that potentially is the commission indicating substantive approval of the rules, but leaving open the option of making changes in those 3 areas that I just named.
Thank you, AG Davenport, for helping us through the nuances of this. Before we move to the motion, and I have a proposed motion typed up that I would read into the record and then seek to have someone move it just to make sure we get it right, and AG Davenport has helped me. But before that, are there any further thoughts, comments, deliberations around the 200 through 600 series from a substantive perspective? All right, let me carefully read this proposed following motion language. I recommend the following motion. In docket number 2003-00071, I move preliminary final approval of the September 25th, 2020 staff revised draft rules for the 200, 300, 400, 500, and 600 rule series as amended by the commission during these deliberations up to and including September 28th, 2020. The motion also includes any conforming edits to the 100 series. That's the definitions. Subject to the condition that the commission make conforming edits to these rules deemed necessary following the 800, 900, and 1200 series rulemaking, and the commission may edit these rules to correct any proofreading errors discovered by COGC staff. This motion does not include approval of the statement of basis and purpose. The commission directs staff to amend the draft statement of basis and purpose consistent with the intent of the commission as expressed during these deliberations. I clarify that the motion is not final action on the rules, and the commission will only take final action after it determines whether any conforming edits or proofreading conditions are necessary, corrections are necessary, and after the commission reviews the final draft statement and basis of purpose. I also state that the intent of the motion is for the commission to approve the substance of the rules and that the commission does not intend to make any further substantive changes to the rules. Oh, a doozy. So that's the motion with the clarifying points. I would seek a motion along those lines.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Are there any further deliberations, discussions around the motion before we take the vote? Hearings Officer Larson, can you please do a roll call for the vote?
Yes, Mr. Chair, one moment. Commissioner Boag.
Here.
And you would signify by saying yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Yes.
Commissioner McGowan.
Yes.
Commissioner Mesner.
Yes.
Commissioner Nanjapa.
Yes.
Commissioner Putnam. Commissioner Robbins.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, you have 6 out of 7 commissioners present and voting in favor of the motion.
Correct. Thank you. And I guess I would also note for the record, since this is the first time we've done a roll call vote, Commissioner Bogue and Commissioner Putnam are non-voting members. So thank you for your vote, Commissioner Bogue. We appreciate that. But I think to clarify the record, it was a 5-0 vote of the voting members of the commission. We'll get this right as we do this. So
We will. Thank you.
okay, great. Thank you. At this point, we have voted the preliminary vote, and I think we need to do 2 things. We need to continue the hearing to November 10th, and we need to move to adjourn the hearing to November 4th at 9 a.m., at which time we would discuss the final 200 to 600 series rules with conforming edits and edited statement and basis and purpose for staff. Director Murphy, looking to you on dates, and AAG Davenport, if you want to explain the nuances between the idea of continuing the hearing to the 10th and what that does versus adjourning to the 4th and what that does, I think that would be helpful.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioners, if you recall, the last time that you moved to continue this 2 through 600 series mission change rulemaking, you did it through October 30th of 2020. It's unlikely, based on the current schedule, that we will be entirely through, you will be entirely through the 8, 9, and 12 series rulemaking by October 30th. And so I recommend that you move to extend this 2 through 600 mission change rulemaking through November 10th, 2020, in order to give the staff time, in order to give the commission time to get through 8, 9, and 12 series rulemaking, the staff to proofread the 2 through 600 rules and definitions, and to complete the statement of basis and purpose. So that would be a motion to continue through November 10th, 2020. And then I recommend that you move to adjourn until a specific date. And I think this is where the chair may be looking for some input from Director Murphy. I recommend that you pick a date that is potentially a good date to either just check in with staff and see where statement of basis and purposes and conforming edits and correcting proofreading errors, or if everything is ready at that point, to actually meet for the final approval. If things are not in a position, then you can simply open the hearing, check in with staff, and then adjourn to the 10th, or whenever it appears that we are ready to do the final vote for this 2 through 600 series rulemaking. So to reiterate, if it's not clear, continuing the hearing to November 10th allows you to set future dates where you could meet to take further action in this rulemaking. Adjourning to a specific date I think is important because it lets the public know when the next time you anticipate meeting on this rulemaking. And if we're not prepared to take final action on that date, we can simply check in and then set the actual final date. But I do believe it's important to let the public know when the next time you anticipate actually meeting in this rulemaking is.
Thank you, AAG Davenport. Director Murphy, do you want to provide any additional context in terms of the adjourn to date?
Thank you, Chair. As I look at our calendar for 8, 9, and 12, we have 800 scheduled October 6th through 9th. We have the 1200 scheduled October 13th through 16th, and October 21 to 23, 900 October 26th through 30, and then November 4 through 6. I think it would make the most sense to me, given kind of how we've developed a process working through the other series, to adjourn until November 4th or 5th on 2 through 6, such that we can complete most of our work on 8 and 12, and be working, staff can do it, the concurrent proofreading and SPP edits, and get those finalized. And then kind of as we're wrapping up our work on 900, we could fold in the work on 2 through 6. So that my recommendation would be probably November 4th or November 5th.
Why don't you tell us which date you want us to adjourn to?
Let's do November 4th.
AAG Davenport, do we do the adjourn thing first or the continuance thing first, or does it matter?
I think you'd need to move to continue first.
All right. I would look for a motion to continue this hearing to November 10th at 9 a.m.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I just want to make one very small edit to the motion if the movement and the seconder will accept it. I don't think you need a time. I think that would be appropriate in the motion to adjourn. And I'd like to be clear that we're not continuing it to November 10th. You're continuing it through November 10th, 2020.
That's why we got you as our AAG. Do the movement and seconder agree with the proposed edit?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, then. I think we now are looking for a motion to adjourn the hearing to November 4th at 9 a.m. Is that right, Mr. Davenport?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, thank you very much. We are adjourned. Bye, everybody.